What's up, film lovers, and welcome back to another episode of The Dark Room, where two blind cinephiles illuminate the sighted. I am Lee Pugsley.
I'm Alex Howard.
And this is a podcast hosted by two legally blind guys for film lovers of all abilities. And today we are very excited because we have a special guest on, and I'm so happy to be able to introduce Marc Muszynski, who is a visually impaired writer who has worked on many things from Dexter to Polly Pocket. And he's had a really cool journey that we're going to learn about today. And Marc, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Long time listener, first time caller.
So to start off, we always ask, especially our blind guests, what was your blind journey? When did you go blind? How did it progress? And how do you identify with all of that now?
It was a weird journey, but it was all in childhood. So my understanding of it is like a little hazy. But what I remember was when I was really little, my parents thought that I was very dumb because I couldn't read. And they were confused because that's mean, but they just thought that I was having some problems because I knew all my letters. And then I would hold the book in my lap the way that all the other kids were, and then I couldn't read any of the words in it. And so they were very concerned about that. And then when I hit kindergarten, they do that school vision test, which maybe has evolved, but at the time you looked through a little thing and there's a box and you had to say if the dot was inside or outside of the box. And I was like, what box? And that was the first indication that it was eye related. And so I went they took me to a variety of specialists. For a while, they thought I had lazy eye. So I had to like sit with a patch over one eye and watch TV. And they got to a couple people that slowly knew more and more about retinal degenerative conditions. And eventually I got to someone at the Chicago Lighthouse who eventually diagnosed me with Stargardt's disease. And it got progressively worse, I'd say, through like my teens and then college, and then has somewhat leveled off since. I think gone down a little bit, but not nearly as dramatically. And my relationship with it has also evolved quite a bit over time. But I think I'm weirdly in like a pretty good place with it now because, well, a couple things happened. My father and sister both started having symptoms very late in life, which is uncommon for Stargardt's. So that sort of made it like more of a hereditary thing. And I don't know why, but that somehow in a way makes me feel like, oh, I'm part of the family. And then more importantly, as I got older and my wife and I were talking about having kids, she got tested for they were doing like a discount genetic panel at her OB. I don't know. I guess we've reached a point in the human genome where you can offer sales on it. And for $99, they tested her for 300 different common genetic mutations. And the only one she was a carrier for was Stargardt's. And
of course, that's how it works, right?
Yeah, of course. We were like, is it some sort of weird genetic predisposition? Like, can our bodies tell that we both have this mutation? I mean, I guess different mutations, but same gene. And that was like really scary at the time. And it made me think a lot about my journey with it. And I don't know if I ever fully came around to this, like, your disability is your superpower thing. I mean, I love it as conceptually, but I don't know that I ever like fully reached it internally. But I do think that being disabled changed the course of my life in ways that I don't regret, in ways that I'm actually like thrilled about. I probably would have been doing a lot more sports and a lot less theater if I could see better. And those track changes led me to where I am now, doing something that I absolutely love. And when we were talking about having a kid, all of a sudden you're like, do I want my child to have this thing? There's a 50-50 chance that they might have Stargardt's. And thinking like, well, wouldn't I prefer that they don't have Stargardt's? All of a sudden is like, wait, so then would I prefer I don't have? It sort of like reopens this whole thing. And then we had our daughter, and because they knew this was a possibility, they draw blood and do some genetic testing like right after the child is born. at least in California. And they took her blood, and we just asked them, hey, can you test for Stargardt's as well? And because there was a pre-existing medical reason for it, they were able to do so. And they found out that she does have the genetic predisposition for it. And at first that was really scary, I think. But now, 2 years in, knowing the daughter that we have, that we're so lucky to have, I think if any of those genes were any different, she'd be a completely different person. And the weirdest thing about parenting is realizing that the day that child was conceived, essentially, is an inflection point. And if you were to change almost anything prior to that, you'd have a different child. And knowing the kid that we have, I'm just so happy that we have her. And then on top of that, there's a lot of cool, there's pharmaceutical treatments coming out that might help prevent her from expressing symptoms and all sorts of stuff like that, which I'm optimistic for her and for her future. But in the moment, I think it's like we're just happy to have this person in the world with us. And honestly, if she gets to do anywhere near the amount of fun things that I have had the opportunity to do, then I think she'll be pretty thrilled, whether it's with or without Stargardt's.
That is really, really beautiful. Can you tell, for people who don't know, what is Stargardt's?
Yeah, it's so it's like a macular degeneration condition. So there's a scar on the center of my retina, essentially, and so my central vision is basically unusable, and everything I see is around the periphery. But that peripheral vision is also generally bad. And then on top of that, because all that vision is bad, and because my eyes, one of them is slightly better than the other, they also shake a bunch. So the end result is no central vision, and then everything else is a little bit blurry and shaky, and I have to look really close to stuff.
And to your knowledge currently, are there any kind of surgical procedures that can be done to restore vision with this condition?
I think they're working on stuff. A lot of the stuff they're working on is the less damage that has already happened, the more effective the treatments are. So in my case, maybe in the next several years, there might be something that could sort of slow down the slow decay. But there are plenty of, everything from injecting modified stem cells for your, the light receptors in your eye, like injecting them into your retina with a 1 atom thick, needle of carbon or whatever, everything from that to replacing parts of your eye with cameras and then or pharmaceuticals to stop the damage. There's a lot of stuff in the works. I don't know that I personally will be a candidate for it, but I think my daughter might. And I think that future generations will be much benefited by it. And especially because a lot of the stuff I think will cross over into different but similar retinal conditions. There's a lot of people that just develop these same kind of symptoms as they age. And if this kind of stuff can prevent that, that would be a huge boon for the population.
I totally get what you're saying with that, but also with what you were saying about your daughter. I have a son, and so, being scared about, oh, does he have this or that? But then you're right, there is that crisis of, do I regret having it? And it's almost like an internal monologue that you have with yourself when you're worried about your child having something like that. And then even with your family, like how you said your dad and your sister now show symptoms, it's almost like they get what you're going through now. So it's almost like they're someone you can go to and talk to about it, and they actually physically understand it. So that's really, really, it's not great that they have it, but you know what I mean? It's great that you have people you can go to and talk to.
Yeah. And I also feel like I've had a couple other opportunities to talk about it. One of my very best friends and former roommates used to work at BuzzFeed, and we did 3 different videos just about being visually impaired. At first, I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. Let's make these videos. Sure, you need to crank out 2 videos a week to keep your job. Why not have me in a couple of them? But in retrospect, I think the process of making those and forcing myself to sit there and tell a camera how I felt about it was really helpful in sort of centering my thinking about it and making me live up to the perspective I wanted to have versus maybe how I felt and still occasionally feel.
I 100% get that. That's pretty much what this podcast is. We were just like, let's go for it. And it's almost like, yeah, I'm positive about it, but now I actually am positive about it. So
Mhm.
yeah, it definitely rubs off like that. We were wondering if you could walk us through your career. I mean, obviously, I looked you up on IMDb before, and I saw you also worked at Honest Trailers, which is freaking awesome. But if you could walk us through your steps to get in the Dexter's writers' room, where I'm sure many people would love to be, how did your career trajectory take you there?
Yeah. It's a very long and winding road. So, and I'm very bad at summarizing those. So I'll do my absolute best. I went to college. I went to college for, I guess, English education, but quickly switched to theater. And I grew up near Chicago. And so I was in Chicago after college doing sketch and improv and storefront theater stuff. And I always knew that the writing and producing and directing parts were like where I was where I was contributing. Not to knock my on-stage work, but I think most audiences would agree. And I knew that I loved TV and movies. Even in high school, like my friends and I would make movies and stuff like that. But because I couldn't, as part of being visually impaired, I can't drive. So LA always just seemed impossible. And then one day, one of my improv idols in Chicago showed up late for a class because he had to pawn his skateboard to make rent. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? So I ended up just committing to move to LA. And luckily, I was performing and doing a little touring with an improv group called Octavarius at the time, which is a lot of folks that I had gone to college with. We had stayed friends and we just sort of made this thing on our own. And it was, I guess, in the scope of improv, like very successful. And we were living together, several of us. And I came home that day and I was like, I think I have to move to LA. And luckily for me, I wasn't the only one who was having those kind of thoughts. And so I got to move out here with 4 friends who all knew me really well, knew my disability, knew some of the specific needs I might have in a city like LA. I think way more importantly than that was just having like a social group to move with and take this crazy leap with, disabled or not. And so we all moved out here in 2013, but we had the very good fortune of about a month before we moved out here, we had created this web series in 2012 called I Made America. And we had entered it into the Austin TV Festival pitch competition. And we were finalists for it. And so I went down there and with the others, and we all pitched this show at part of this pitch competition. And we were lucky enough to win. And so about a month before we moved to LA, we like won this thing, and they were like, the prize for winning is you get a mentor, and they're going to set up pitches for this show all around LA. And so we got to move to LA thinking, hey, we're going to pitch this show. Like, why does everyone say this is so hard? And we got this amazing mentor, this woman, Dina, who was so supportive and who took time beyond just this specific project to give me notes on my writing and stuff like that. And so we roll up in LA and we do, I think, 4 different pitches like Comedy Central, NBC, Sony, somewhere else. And everyone passes. And then I'm like, oh God, I'm just like an unemployed guy who just moved to LA who can't drive. And I want to get into the entertainment industry. And around that same time, I was realizing that every single entry-level entertainment job required a driver's license, at least at the time. I think that has shifted a bit. But
it's still very common. Yeah.
Okay. And it's like sort of get it in the sense that if you need your assistant to occasionally be able to go back to your house and let the plumber in, you might think they need a driver's license for that. And this was a little bit pre-Uber and Lyft too. And that's on top of how hard it is to even get an interview for an assistant job in LA. And so the one thing I knew is that I wanted to attack it in as many angles as I had stamina to do so. So I knew I was going to keep writing so I could keep sending scripts to people. I knew I was going to keep making stuff with my friends who were both out here. We were doing videos, we were doing sketch shows and improv shows anywhere we could. But I also knew I wanted to get some sort of entertainment industry job so that I could meet people that I could tell about the sketch shows and ask to read the scripts. And that third one was by far the hardest, to the point where about a year in, I had been dating my then girlfriend, now wife, and we met in Chicago, and she basically gave me a year to figure things out in LA because she wasn't working in any entertainment industry specific role. So she was sort of like, what if you can't get around and this doesn't work out? I don't want to uproot my whole life and move there just to move back. She said it like really lovingly though, and fully justified, not in some sort of crass, like you're going to fail way. So she was moving out. I ended up getting just a day job to have something. And I was just like, this assistant thing sucks. And I don't know how I'm ever going to get one of these. And then about 6 months after she moved there, and right after we had gotten engaged, I saw a job posting for a part-time student internship in Sony Comedy. And Dina, the one mentor that we had formerly worked at Sony in that department. And so she was able to put my resume in, but not before asking, are you sure you want to do this? You're 29 years old, and this is a part-time student internship that pays $9 an hour. And also, you're not a student. And I was like, oh, hang on. I just enrolled in LA City College so that I can qualify.
There you go. That's how you do it.
And so she was able to get them to actually look at my resume, which I think is the first battle of getting any sort of assistant job. And I don't know by what happenstance I made the cut of people they bothered calling, but they did. And the two people that called me were awesome. We hit it off. I brought up my eyes near the end of the call because I didn't want to feel like I was trying to like bait and switch them or something. And they were like, yeah, we think that'll be fine. And so for 6 months, I was a part-time student intern, and my wife helped me like buy college kid looking clothes, and I shaved my beard. And I tried my best to fit in with the other 19 and 20-year-old interns who were real college students. And luckily, nobody checked to see if I had actually enrolled in any LACC classes. And the people at Sony were awesome. And right toward the end of my time there, the head of the department's assistant left. And I realized this was my one big chance to get the sort of desk job where you don't necessarily need to be driving. And on top of that, a desk job at a place where where they knew who I was, they knew what I could do, and I wouldn't have to like explain that to them in the interview. And so I went in with my whole speech prepared. I told them how much I felt like I loved working there and I had really grown and contributed. And they were like, that's amazing. Yes, we agree. It's too bad we already hired someone. That woman, whose name was Alexandra Franklin, ended up becoming one of my best friends and now writing partners. But at the time, I was like, oh no, she stole my dreams.
Oh, that's funny.
But she was super cool about it. And, in her defense, she had been on her own journey where this job was like a really important milestone. And everyone at Sony was really supportive and helped me get a job at NBC. I spent 3.5 years at NBC. They helped me get a job working on the pilot of the show Abby's, which was a short-lived NBC multicam set in a backyard bar. And that
who was in that?
Natalie Morales was the lead, and then Nelson Franklin was in it. Neil Flynn from Scrubs and The Middle. Oh God, who else? There's so many. Kimia Bapornia was in it. It was a fantastic cast. Like they were all just the best people. And everyone who worked, the writers were so nice and welcoming. I got lucky in that the pilot got picked up to series, which isn't a given. It, in fact, is a rarity. And I got to continue on the show as a writer's assistant. And then I got even luckier that they had 10 episodes and 9 writers. And when it came to the last one, the showrunner was so busy with everything else that he let the script coordinator and I be the writers on it, with quite a bit of hand-holding from the more experienced members of the writing staff. And so I got to write after taking a very circuitous route for not being able to drive. I had a real stroke of luck getting to work on this really fun show with and ultimately get a writing credit out of it. And then the show got canceled. I was like, oh no. I'm basically back at square one, and it's hard to go back now. It's like it took me 4 years to get a writer's assistant job, and now I'm unemployed and my insurance is running out and I need to get one again somehow. Luckily for me, another friend, also named Alex, ironically, a lot of great Alexes in the world, as some of you know.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Who we had done, I had met doing sketch and improv stuff in LA, but then, become friends with. We had collaborated on some writing stuff, a script for his comedy band. And he happened to know that this guy, Clyde Phillips, who was the showrunner of the first 4 seasons of Dexter, amongst other things, was looking for an assistant at the time. And so he put me up for that. And he didn't even really ask me about it. He was just like, you're going to get a call from this guy. Be cool. I put you up for this job. And I'm so glad he did. And I'm also so glad he rushed it, because I could have easily overthought myself out of it. Because I'm like, he's doing drama. Most of my experience is comedy, blah, blah, blah. But Clyde was really cool. He did end up hiring me. And through him, I got to see how his mind works in putting together a show, because we did a lot of development and pitches and stuff. And he let me be in the room for those. He was just incredibly open and thoughtful and engaged as a mentor. And then during my time working for him, the revival of Dexter, which became Dexter New Blood, came across his plate. And so I got to see him come up with the pitch for that and take it out and talk to, get Michael C. Hall on board and get the network on board and watch all that come together. And at the very end of it, he was like, hey, he was just awesome and supportive and gracious enough to staff my writing partner and I on that season. And so that was sort of, it's crazy because it was like the journey. I wouldn't have gotten the assistant work without that mentor, and I wouldn't have gotten that mentor without creating stuff. And I wouldn't have gotten a writing credit without having done all that other stuff. But I wouldn't have gotten put in front of Clyde without that friend that I met putting up shows and collaborating on stuff. Like, we spent probably hundreds of hours writing things together. And then Clyde wouldn't have hired me if I hadn't had the writing experience before. And he certainly wouldn't have trusted me, and probably would not have given us the chance to staff if I hadn't had like a credit and hadn't worked so diligently for him and with him. And so it was sort of this confluence of all the different approaches I was taking happened to come together for like a couple big pops that pushed me over the edge.
Where does the Screen Junkies of it all fit into?
Oh, yeah. So when I was
I absolutely
first
love
here,
Honest Trailer, so I had to ask you about that.
They're so funny. And I basically, what happened was when I was just applying for random assistant jobs, I saw that there was a position of, I forget what they called it, but it was essentially like staff writer for a week at Defy Media, which was the parent company of Screen Junkies and Honest Trailers at the time. And I applied for it with a really unconventional, like, my cover letter was just essentially like a BuzzFeed article of like 10 reasons you should hire me or something like that. Because I was like, whatever, I don't know anybody. They're not gonna call me. This is such a long shot. And then they ultimately did. And the 2 people who did the interview were awesome. We spent most of the time talking about the game Flappy Bird, which was huge in that moment.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And then ultimately I got to work there for about a week, and it happened to be the week that they were doing the honest trailer for Frozen, which was a huge movie at the time. I mean, still is a huge movie. And I think it's still one of the biggest trailers. It was also like a really humbling experience because they were really funny in general, but also really knew that format well. And so I, coming in thinking I had a good amount of comedy experience, realized the value of the specificity of like this specific format, like what works in an honest trailer. And they had such a gut feeling for it that when I look at that thing and I look at the stuff that I contributed, and then more importantly, the stuff that I had the first draft of, that I look at how they tweaked it, I should have paid them for the learning experience.
Well, we will definitely link to the Frozen Honest trailer in the description if you guys haven't seen it. It's pretty funny.
It's really good. I remember that trailer when it came out too.
I mean, it was so much fun. And they were also smart. Like we were all sort of like rolling our eyes at the movie. And then Andy, I think was his name, the guy who was in charge of it, was like, looked at some of the early jokes and early bits that were in it. And he's like, regardless of what we're all sort of joking about, I think the general consensus is that people love this movie, and this honest trailer, if it's snarky without that sense of love, it won't work. And that, I think, was more importantly than any of the good jokes. That is why it was successful, is that he understood how it needed to land with the audience.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think that was a very good decision, because without that love there, people would have responded to it differently, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh my God. And there are some movies where I think people want to kind of hate on it or whatever, and they do those great too. But he aptly observed that this was not one of them, and this needed to be handled differently.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And also too, just like thinking about like all the stuff that you've done, and just like your journey is really cool in terms of like the career trajectory. It's really cool and kind of crazy when, like, as you were saying, you kind of look back at everything you've done and just see how it all goes together. And you think about those moments where you're like, am I even going to get anywhere? Like, this all seems pointless. What's the point of any of this? And yeah, I don't know. Like, I started out in theater as well, and I'm kind of more in the film space currently, but just kind of seeing how all the things, like in my trajectory too, have kind of gone together and culminated in where I'm at now, that I'm like, oh, if I hadn't done this, then this wouldn't have happened if I hadn't met this person. And basically so much relatability in what you're saying. And I think that's, for anyone out there listening, it's just the nature of the industry that it can all go together, and you may not see it at the time or realize it, but there can be a payoff.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's really hard to track if you're making progress some of the time, because there's obvious markers like, did someone offer me a job, or did someone buy my script or make my movie or whatever it is? But how do you know if you're hitting the milestones along that path? Because so much of the rest of it, it feels like nothing, windfall. And the reality is there are actually some signs that you can track. Like when I think about getting that assistant job working for Clyde, which ultimately turned into the thing, like my friend Alex wouldn't have thought of me and put me up for it if he hadn't respected the work we'd done together, and liked me as a person and thought I could, handle that job.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that tracks. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing about your journey, and congratulations on your success with the things that you've been able to achieve so far. On that note too, I was wanting to shift a little bit to ask you, in relation to your visual impairment, when you've been in like writers' rooms or even just other office jobs and everything, what accommodations have you had to bring to the table for yourself? And have you felt like people around you have accommodated your disability well?
Yeah, I've been really lucky in that most of the writers' rooms I've been in have been Dexter shows, and they've been with the same like a similar leadership team and a lot of the same writers, depending on what show it was. So I've been really lucky in that I haven't had to spend a lot of time explaining it. in the more recent ones. And every show I've worked on has been great. Dexter, I was so scared when I first started. I was like, man, are they just going to think I'm weird or annoying? And the two people at the top, Clyde Phillips, and then another guy, Scott Reynolds, were both like immediately jumped in. And Scott was just like, I'll read the boards back to you every time I write on them or whatever. And they did ask me, like, is there something else you need that would be better? And they're, depending on the writer's room and you know, someone's specific disability, I'm sure there are different things. But in my case, I spend a lot of time just trying to remember stuff anyway. And so reading it back was like a pretty good system for me. And that has been the main thing. And then going forward, I think, you know, they don't care what program I write a first draft of something in, as long as I can convert it to a final draft file by the time it gets to them. So I'll write in Highland usually, if, you know, when I'm doing my part of our scripts, and I'll use whatever other tools I need to get the job done. And then even on set, there's technology now where you can stream whatever's in camera just to an iPad, which I don't know if either of you have experienced like when on set or anything. But for me, that was like game changing, because I could hold the iPad right up to my face and then I can actually see what's going on, instead of trying to like stick my head in front of other people at Video Village and feeling guilty about it or whatever. So everyone was like really supportive about that. And then the only time I've worked on a non-Dexter show was between seasons, we worked on Polly Pocket, which is like an animated thing for Netflix. And they scheduled a meeting with me ahead of time to ask about accessibility concerns and stuff like that. Like, it was almost too much. I was like, this is too nice, and I don't know how to handle it.
Did you say Netflix scheduled a meeting?
No, sorry. It was this woman, Lila, who was the story editor on the show. And so she, knowing that I was visually impaired, was like, I wanna get ahead of this and do the right thing. And it was almost like all the things that, if you had written like a guidebook of how to do it, she must have found that and then done them all. Because I was like, I almost wish I needed more things, just so that you would know how much I appreciate this.
Yeah, that's awesome. So would you say Highland is more accessible than Final Draft in terms of voiceover and all of that?
I don't know in terms of voiceover specifically, because I use it sparingly. Like, I'll dictate in spots. But what I mainly love about Highland is the font on the editor can be however big you want it to be, and it'll still output thing that looks like a script. So for me, the font on Highland is jacked up to like 80-point font or whatever, and that's enough that I can read it without too much strain.
You still rely more on vision for writing than using like voiceover playback?
Yeah, usually. I've been slowly transitioning, partially because it is easier in a lot of cases, and also because like my vision's not going to get any better. So I might as well start embracing the future. And I especially use dictation whenever I have to write, like any other kind of thing I'm doing on my phone. If I'm like writing a text message or making a note to myself, that's where it started to seep in more and more. I think because I'm so used to typing when I'm writing and revising, like just the feedback loop of eyes to hands is what I'm more used to. It's been harder to shift.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I used to rely a lot more on vision and just kind of increasing the font. I have glaucoma, so as my vision has degressed over time, I've had to switch more to like relying on voiceover. And I recently just got Final Draft for my first time, so I'll be exploring that as well in terms of the scripts and everything that I'm writing. But one of the things I did do recently when you're talking about dictation on your phone and everything is I actually just got a Bluetooth keyboard, and it can like sync with my iPhone now. So if I'm writing an email or a note or whatever, I can do it so much quicker now, just like typing on the Bluetooth keyboard and just like syncing it to my phone. And I'll even like write, you know, like scenes and stuff on my phone on a notepad or on like a Google Doc or something. And that was a game changer for me for now. And I'll still rely on voiceover to tell me like the words and everything, because dictation is cool and I do use it, but I'm always afraid that it's going to like have like spelling errors or something that I don't see, or add an extra comma that I didn't want there, that people are going to read it and they're like, oh, do you know grammar? And I'm like, I do, but it's dictation.
Yep. Yeah, I have all those same fears. Do either of you know Sheridan O'Donnell?
think I
No.
do. Are they associated with respectability? Is he
Uh,
associated with?
I know him through the Inevitable Foundation, but he may have done Respectability at some point. He's a writer director with RP, and he's a fantastic writer and a fantastic director. And he also has spent a lot of time figuring out Final Draft and Highland, like voiceover-y type stuff. So he would, I mean, in general, he'd be a great person for this podcast just for his like brilliant filmmaking stuff. But he's also a great person to talk to if you're trying to navigate that stuff.
That's so good to know. I might have to reach out if Final Draft gives me a lot of headache. Because you know how
Yeah.
there's always like that learning curve for all of us. Every time you're learning a new software, whether it's
Hmm.
visually for us or with voiceover, it's always like, it can be really frustrating. And like for me, I'll always start something new. And then I'm just like, I
Hmm.
hate this. I'm never using this again. And I'll put it down for a few days. Then I come back to it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this now.
Well, and I think in his case, and he'd be able to give a more detailed version of the story. There were a couple things where I think he reached out to Final Draft and they're like, yeah, we're not incorporating that in this version, maybe in the future. And he was like, all right, I'm going to start working on Highland then. So there might be a couple things that are just not voiceoverable at this moment.
Yeah. And for people who aren't aware, Final Draft and Highland are script writing software.
Mhm.
So I know that was a little bit of inside baseball, but have you ever brought in some of your life experience being visually impaired into any of your writing for Dexter or any of the other shows that you've worked on?
Not specifically for Dexter. I mean, I feel like it informs so many things that I'm sure it has featured in it in some way. But one of the Polly Pocket episodes we did is about Polly Pocket encountering a blind dog. So it definitely featured in that one.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fun to do. And it's interesting because what my ultimate takeaway was like kind of gave me sympathy for some of the less nuanced takes on stuff and even ones that maybe non-disabled people have created because it's Polly Pocket is an 11-minute show for 6 to 11-year-olds where they have to use various magic powers and it has to have like jokes and funny hijinks and all this stuff. And we had to work so hard to try to like if you want to make a nuanced thing, you have to kind of get to the nuance. You can't just start there. Like you need to sort of like establish your argument in a way. I was like, man, trying to squeeze that in while also making sure somebody uses their tiny power was a lot more difficult than I thought it would be.
Yeah, especially in like 11 minutes, you don't really have a lot of time to get all that nuance in there because nuance takes time to build. So,
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like the way the episode turned out when I watched it, I was like, "Oh, I think we successfully got most of the sort of nuanced statement we were trying to make in there, but I kind of wish the episode was funnier and had more going on."
That is good that they had you in the writer's room there for like reference because I know a lot of shows, like I've consulted on a couple, especially kids shows, trying to bring in like blind characters and all of that.
Mhm.
But it's good that you were there to kind of guide the ship in the right direction because it is very easy in a comedic show like that to go kind of offensive with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And the way that that show and a lot of other animated things work is there was like a summit where we'd meet for a couple days. There was 6 writers and we'd all break our episodes together in 2 days, which was like also kind of fun because it was like rapid. It was like speed breaking story. And then you'd go off and write it. And so that was an episode that you had to come in with like 6 episode ideas. And I was like, oh, maybe one about like some visually impaired stuff. Like that might be fun to write. So I felt better knowing that it had come from me and that I was ultimately gonna my writing partner Alex and I were gonna ultimately be the ones writing it. So that made me feel a little better about it. And they were like super respectful about I don't think they ever gave any notes that were like, "Are you sure blind people think this about themselves?" So they were very supportive. And honestly,
That's
just the fact that they could have picked any of the other 5 ideas, which were also great. So they were, I think I appreciate on their side that they wanted to engage with that as a subject for an episode.
yeah, that's really good to hear. I'm glad that they were receptive to that idea. And out of curiosity, within your career as a writer, what challenges have you encountered aside from just like typical writer's block, which any writer
Mm.
can attest to? But what other challenges, whether related to the visual impairment or not, have you encountered?
I think the biggest challenges are just that a lot of things in your career, and even a career, like career seems weird to say because a career is sort of something you can look backward at, but it's not really something you can do in the moment. Like in the moment, you could write something, you could reach out to people, you could try to meet new people. So in theory, you're like doing career in that way, but you'd never describe it that way. But when I think of the biggest hurdle has been realizing that there's so much of it that's outside your control, and that the best thing you can do is, like, for example, like, oh man, winning an Emmy Award would be awesome. But I can't control whether I win an Emmy Award. I can't control if I'm nominated for an Emmy Award. I can barely control if I work on a show that would even be eligible to be nominated for an Emmy Award. I can control is, did I write a script? Did I show up prepared for work? Did I do my best to get my writing to the people who've maybe expressed interest? Then there's some stuff that I can kind of influence. Even when you go in to pitch a show to somebody, a mentor once told me that like 90% of the time they already know if it's a yes or a no based on the general idea and what they know of you as a writer and who else is attached, most importantly. Only some of the time can you sell the show, but you can always sell yourself. And so I've basically been just trying to focus on the things that are within my control. The more direct answer to your question is like, we've had 3 pieces of development that we've taken out. The first one went out to people on the Thursday before the COVID stay-at-home order. So that was not great. The second one went out to people, and then a few days later was the George Floyd Black Lives Matter stuff. There's like all these way more important things than our like silly little shows. And then we were supposed to send something out last week, and then now LA is on fire. And so you just realize how sort of small everything is. I think the challenge is like not letting that beat you down and focusing on stuff you're excited about and stories you want to tell and hoping that those get out.
I completely resonate with that. And it makes me think of this, like, I'm a big theater guy. So like there was this Stephen Sondheim documentary that came out a few years ago. And one of the things he said in it was, don't write for success or for something to be a hit. Just write because you're passionate about it. And I think that, I would even like say that transcends just writing, as a creative, it's like create because it's something you care about and something that you're passionate about. And I always tell people, like, if you want to create art, any of us can create art. We can't control how widely distributed it becomes, but whatever art we create, that's a piece of us that reflects a bit of who we are, and no one can take that away from us. And I think just reflecting on that in those times where I'm like, what am I doing? And like, I wish I could create. It's like, it does feel very empowering to like know that, to know, okay, this is what I have control over. And I mean, even taking that a bit farther too, like as my vision has decreased, and maybe you guys can relate to this too, it's like, there are discouraging moments, but it's also like, okay, I can't control the fact that this is happening. What I can control is what I can do still and what I'm going to do. And, so I just think what you said resonates on so many different levels that I think are very applicable to anyone.
Yeah. And even like with this podcast, like Lee and I mean, yeah, it'd be great if we got sponsors, and yeah, it'd be great if this, and this, but like all we can do is book good guests and ask good questions and do good research and be passionate and love what we're doing, and then see what happens from there.
And I've been trying to think when I think about what I want for this next year of 2025, or maybe not what I want, but like how I want to show up in the world. One of the big things that I want to focus on is like doing over being, because whenever I spend a lot of time thinking about like being a writer is this sort of just, I don't know, romantic vision of myself, like sitting at a desk, cranking out brilliant material. But ultimately, like I'm only a writer when I'm writing, when I'm doing the writing. And a lot of the rest of the time, I'm a father or a husband or a friend or like a guy vacuuming. I don't know. And if I focus the moments of like being, you only be a thing for like the fleeting time that it's there, and then everything else is changing around you. And if that's what you're focused on and you don't enjoy the process of coming to that moment, then the sort of joy, the happiness you feel from being that thing will fade just as fast.
Well said. I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Oh no, me too. Clearly you are a writer in what you just said. That was really great. One question for you. I know, I mean, I'm currently watching Dexter Original Sin. It is really
Mhm.
great. Like I mentioned to you before we started recording, I am in awe of how, I mean, all the actors captured what they did in the original series, but especially the guy playing Dexter. He got those mannerisms down, and it's crazy how the writing and his performance and everything matches up to the original. But if there's a show on right now that if it was your dream call for them to have you on their like in their writer's room besides Dexter, what would it be?
Oh man, I feel like I'm not allowed to answer that because I want Dexter to come back, and I don't
That's
want
true.
to.
That's a
But
good answer.
but what I will say about Patrick Gibson, who's the actor who plays young Dexter, and actually, and all the actors on, I mean that show is blessed with between Christian Slater, Patrick Dempsey, and Sarah Michelle Gellar. There's a three like incredible veteran actors, and one of the things that was really the first show we worked on, Dexter New Blood, didn't it we didn't get to go to set because it was during COVID and they were shooting in Massachusetts. They didn't want anyone there, and they certainly didn't want to pay for anyone to be there. And then the second Dexter we worked on ended up getting shelved in favor of Dexter Original Sin. So that was the first one where we had the chance to go to set. And it's easy to forget in the grind of writing for film and television that the end goal of these things is to get produced. And being on set and seeing the wisdom that like the actors brought to the characters, even if it meant sometimes asking for lines to be different. And not just the actors, like what the director was thinking about, what the lighting people and sound people and costume people and all of this stuff, like how they were interpreting the words on the page and how they were enhancing and elevating them was really informative to me and the writing process. Because at the end of the day, like the script is like the seed of a vision that has to get planted and grown and blossom, and understanding how those other people can bring like their voices to it and making space for them to do so, both in like a colleague coworker way but also in the script, is really powerful.
I think that's the beauty of the collaborative process. And I think that's why like creation is so fun because you get to bring this culmination of ideas together with so many other people. And
Mhm.
oftentimes the finished product is, even better than what you had envisioned in your mind on any capacity, whether you're, a designer or an actor, a director, a writer. It's like, oh, I never would have thought that it could reach this level. And then all these people come together and it does. And it's so cool. It's such a beautiful
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah. And there are
And
times where that's frustrating, waiting for all those pieces to come together. And in those times, I think about writing fiction. And that's great too. And then, but like you just need to know what you need as a creative person. Like if you need a place, like if you need a podcast to have something to make and do and keep you present and connected with an audience of people, like do that. And then if you want to work on a TV pilot that 7 people may read and will just live in that desk behind me forever, then that's also great sometimes.
My last question for you. Is there anything you're working on the side? I know you mentioned writing fiction. Are you
Mhm.
writing a book or anything on your own or anything you can talk about or no?
Yeah, my writing partner and I have pilots of our own that we're taking out, and then we're working on a feature because we both love features. I feel like movies is all I watched when I was really young, and then TV I sort of came to later, and I'm excited to work on a feature length thing.
That is what I wanted to ask you earlier. You said you patched and you watched TV, and I did that too. What do you remember watching when you used to patch your eye?
Oh my God. I remember it being cartoons, like definitely Looney Tunes at some point. But God, well, how old would I have been? I think maybe I had already gotten into the Toonami, like the anime, the sort of like
Nice.
easily commercialized anime that they had on Cartoon Network.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was in like preschool. So I did you remember the Disney like storybook VHS tapes?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we had tons of those. So my mom would be like, all right, go pick one out so you can patch your eye. And I go pick one out and come down. And yeah.
What an insane. I was even as a kid, I was like, so the thing I'm supposed to do is the thing that you tell me I'm not allowed to do for this long?
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, thank you so much for being on our show. This has been really great. And I love that we were able to time it out with like as Dexter's running too, make it a little timely. So if anyone's interested, you can watch Dexter Original Sin on Paramount Plus. It has audio description. Same with Dexter New Blood. That also has audio description. So thank you so much for being on. Is there anything else that you wanted to plug?
Just thank you both for having me and for making such a wonderful show.
Yeah, we really appreciate your perspective on just the creative process, on life in general, and just your approach to everything is really cool. And appreciate your insights and yeah, everything you have to say. So thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
for everyone listening, you can email us if you have any
Mhm.
questions for Mark or for us, or with any topics you have suggestions for. You can email us at darkroomfilmcast@gmail.com. That is darkroomfilmcast@gmail.com.
And you can also follow us on Instagram at Darkroom Filmcast and subscribe to us on YouTube at Darkroom Filmcast. And before we sign off, we just want to take a moment to thank Matt Lauterbach and All Senses Go for making transcripts of this episode possible. And also, we want to thank Blind Can for being our sponsor for editing this episode as well, and all previous episodes too. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you here next time on The Dark Room.
All right, take care, guys. Stay safe.